thank you for the introduction, and thank you, Dr. Fox, as well. I have to admit, I feel a little bit like a fish out of water, being from Charleston, South Carolina, focusing on coastal issues and coming to England and doing this presentation, but I'm really excited to be participating in this conference, and well, the weather is just a perk, you know. Honestly, this is probably my only chance to see snow this winter, so I'm not really minding it, though I think I probably missed my chance for the snow angel. So be it. Anyway, I am going to be talking about coastal hazards and green infrastructure, some projects that we've been working on at the Office for Coastal Management. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the organization I'm working with. Actually, you probably heard my introduction. She mentioned Coastal Services Center, Office for Coastal Management. My office actually was the Coastal Services Center, and last year we joined forces with the Office of Ocean and Coastal Resource Management. So now we are the Office for Coastal Management. These coastal programs highlight some of our coastal management initiatives: coastal zone management, coral reef, conservation, digital coast, and the National Estuarine and Research Reserves, which are across our coast, across the country. But our top priority is uniting public, private, academic, and nonprofit efforts to create and foster coastal resilience. I do want to point out the third thumbnail there, the Digital Coast. That's a website that we host at the Office of Coastal Management. It was developed through a partnership with lots of agencies that represent our primary user base. So the American Planning Association, the National States Geographic Information Council, Association of State Floodplain Managers, the Coastal States Organization, the Nature Conservancy, and several others. It's a very robust website. It's really a storehouse of tools, data, applications, trainings that are available to support coastal managers. We have terabytes of elevation data. There are lots of other wonderful resources, so definitely something worth checking out. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to give you a brief tour of our Coastal Flood Exposure Mapper, our new and improved product. I'm going to give you a brief run-through of a New Jersey Coastal Resilience Initiative case study that uses a tool very, very similar to our Exposure Mapper. And then I'm going to give you a sneak peek at a project we're working on right now, which is an online tutorial, a green infrastructure mapping guide. So, coastal communities are at risk. We all know this. They have increasing populations, increasing development, and therefore increasing exposures to coastal hazards. Often when they start undertaking the assessment of these vulnerabilities, they're overwhelmed. They just don't have the experience, the guidance, or the technical capacity to really be able to pinpoint vulnerabilities and opportunities. So we have traditionally provided technical support. We've gone in with some training and workshops that we developed through the years. It was called Roadmap for Adapting to Coastal Risks. We would work with communities that were kind of on the verge of an initiative, and we would help them get the right people in the room, get some initial maps, and have workshops just to start the process, just get people in the same room talking about their exposures and what they could do about it. And oftentimes, these were people from different sectors of a community that had never been in the same room at the same time talking about those particular issues. But we knew that need was out there, and essentially we just weren't able to meet all the demand that was out there. So we ended up developing this tool, which is the Coastal Flood Exposure Mapper. And you can't read there in the back, but just beneath that title is a sentence that pretty well sums up what the tool is about. It says, help start your community discussions about hazard impacts with maps of your area that show people, places, and natural areas or resources exposed to coastal flooding. So again, it's about maps of the area that show exposures to coastal flooding that are intended to start the conversation. And again, this is based upon a training. The roots of this comes from a training that we developed, the Roadmap for Adapting to Coastal Risk. It's also a structure for participatory community vulnerability assessment. So if you launch the tool, you get this disclaimer right off the bat, and it just kind of has the standard cover our backside statement as far as this is not for permitting, planning, navigational purposes. It also points out that this is based on nationally consistent data. It's a screening level tool. And really, it's intended just as I'm really kind of beating this horse, I suppose, but it's really just to get the process started with the assumption that once communities get the ball rolling, they'll start working with best available data, local data. Also, it's a good point for me to point out that this tool currently has been expanded from the initial pilot, which was in the Northeast for the Delaware, New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania coastal counties, to now include all coastal counties along the Gulf and the East Coast. So, once you sign your LifeWay and accept the terms, the veil lifts and you are exposed to our launch screen here. You'll notice across the top, these three buttons here, select, map, and collect. That really represents the workflow of this particular application. You select your location, you select your map group, then you actually compose your maps, save your maps, and at the very end you can go back and collect all the maps that you've composed and share them. We generally recommend that someone starts off with the flood hazards, and this is essentially represents a collection of maps that are used as overlays throughout the rest of the map groups. So here we've launched into the coastal flood map group, and you can see at the top you're prompted to select a location. Here we're looking at Pamlico County, North Carolina. And you can see the group of maps that are available on the left bar there, and the default is the Coastal Flood Hazard Composite. That's something that we actually developed at our office. It was derived out of some work that we did with the New York Department of State that followed Sandy. They wanted to create something that represented the graduated risk that they have along the shoreline. So they created this data set just through a simple union of a variety of different inundation data sets. They actually ranked it low, medium, high. We've followed that methodology very similarly, but we've just essentially included a count of the number of zones that happen to intersect a particular area. And in creating that, we essentially took zones from all of the inundation data sets that we had included. So that's shallow coastal flooding, FEMA flood zones, hurricane storm surges, and sea level rise. And we ended up creating this, which represents just a hotspot, a quick reference to find the hotspots of exposures within your community. There we go. And then for each of our maps, we also have a map blurb that gives the so what. It tells you why these maps, why this information is important, why you want to look at these particular maps, and it just really puts the context around the data, and as I said, spells out the so what for the user. These are all the other hazard data sets that we have in this particular map group. We have a shallow coastal flooding data set. This actually comes from our sea level rise and coastal inundation impacts tool that we have, and so is the sea level rise data that we have. And both of those are actually built off of high resolution digital elevation models. And those are available for all of the coastal U.S. Then we have FEMA flood zones and storm surge. And storm surge is actually, this is a unique product. This is from the National Hurricane Center. And it's an experimental product. I don't know how much that you know about storm surge, but traditionally when you see storm surge zones, it's actually created from slosh, sea, lake, and overland surges from hurricanes modeling. For a particular scenario, intensity of hurricane, say Hurricane 2, if they're modeling, they just have a particular basin that they model, and they'll create what are called maximum envelopes of water, meows. And that would represent one storm under certain parameters: intensity, its track, its wind speed, tidal conditions. So when they create these MOMs, these inundation surge, storm surge inundation zones, they create thousands of MOMs, all of these different variables mixed up for a particular intensity, and then combine them together. So for any of one of these scenarios, it's the worst case. They just take the maximum inundation for any particular cell and combine all of those together. So again, that's traditionally done basin by basin by basin. The National Hurricane Center just last hurricane season releases national MOMs, so they stitched all these basins together. And that is an experimental product. You don't see it in many places. They created a story map. We released it here. EPA also has it in their Create tool. So those are the hazard overlays that are available throughout the tool. That's right. That's what should be fancy. It is? It's bizarre. Oh, there we go. I'm good.
Okay.
Whatever I did.
I guess I had to
was the right
catch up.
thing. Yeah, you just have to sit there. Okay, so I just want to walk you through the functionality that we have here. At the very top left-hand corner, you see the blue box. That represents how you can, the area that you have for a drop-down to select the different map groups. You also, in the green box, that highlights the opacity, control, the transparency of the data within the map. At the bottom of the red box, we link to data sources, so we actually point users to the authoritative sources. Most of these data sets actually come from other federal agencies. Some of them are our own. We also, within the data sources, have a common thread with what Dr. Fox laid out as far as a tutorial of how to use these map services in an online platform like ArcGIS Online. And then we have another button down there that points directly to our resident point if you want to use all of our services. And then in the upper right-hand corner, you can change the base map from this gray canvas to some imagery. And the really interesting part is the save the map up there. And so you can actually, once you're done composing the map, you can save the map. And you can see that we've increased. We have one map in our bin there. You can check your bin just by clicking upon the number, that bubble that contains the number. So that's pretty much all the functionality that we have within the tool. And we've advanced on to our societal map group. In this particular instance, we're looking at poverty. This is just block group from American Community Survey 5-year summary file. The rest of it is 2010 census at the block group. So at this point, the only thing that you really see that's different are all of the icons across the top now. So all of those hazard layers that we were looking at have become potential overlays. Now here we turned on the storm surge, and you can see just beneath those icons you can adjust the opacity. And again, you just compose the maps that you want and save them and carry on. This is just a map tree that lets you know. I'm not going to take you through every single map that we have, but this shows you the list of what we do have available. So within the societal maps, population density, the density of poverty, the density of elderly, 65 or older. We have density of employees, and then projected population growth. Within infrastructure, we have some the development. So that's our developed classes from our coastal change analysis program, our land cover data set that is part of the National Land Cover Data Atlas. Is essentially the coastal expression of the NLCD. Then we have critical facilities within infrastructure, and then development patterns. That's where on top of the developed classes, we overlay any areas that have changed to development, so that you can really pinpoint where the community is expanding and changing from some other land cover class to a developed land cover class. Then in the ecosystem maps, you have natural areas and open space, then potential pollution sources, and natural protection. So those are all the maps that we have available. At the end, you can go to the collect and share your maps, and here we have a collection of the maps that we've actually looked at thus far. You have a button to go back and view the map within the application. You have a URL a unique URL that you can pass along. You'll notice the first one on the left has actually been shortened. The other two I actually went to collect so quickly before it could generate the shortened URL. And then at the very bottom, you can print the maps so that you can print these off as PDFs. And then finally, we have tips, resources, and case studies. So we have tips on how to use these maps with your communities as far as the type of format, who to include, questions to ask when you're looking at them, case studies that are relevant to this type of work, and then other relevant resources. So that's a quick run through of the Coastal Flood Exposure Mapper. Now I'd like to give you a quick walkthrough of a case study of a partner who has used a very, very similar tool to engage communities in resilience planning in New Jersey. That partner is the Jacques Cousteau National Estuary Research Reserve, Jacques Cousteau NEAR for short. They have been an advocate for coastal resilience in the area for quite a while. We actually first worked with them in 2010 doing one of those roadmap workshops I talked about, where we had participatory sessions bringing people from different sectors together, looking at maps, talking about exposures and opportunities, essentially. And that was for a community that was working on updating their hazard mitigation plan. Jacques Cousteau at that point was really trying to leverage that effort to try to get any kind of additional considerations of sea level rise and try to get that kind of assessment information integrated in other planning. They have been beating the drum for resilience for quite a while, and then there was a little storm that passed through the area that really, after it passed, in the wake of Sandy, coastal communities really started listening and started lining up and asking for their assistance from Jacques Cousteau NEAR. And that happened to be right about the same time that we were working on or finishing up the pilot version of the Coastal Flood Exposure Mapper. We actually showed that to them, and they were quite interested. They ended up developing this full circle process, if you will, for resilience planning, in which they work with communities to assess using online tools, assessing vulnerabilities, visualizing exposures, then analyzing planning, looking for essentially looking at planning mechanisms, looking for opportunities, gaps, recommendations, and then finally working with them to try to implement some of those recommendations. Again, I kind of call that a full circle approach. And so we showed them the flood exposure mapper, and they liked it so much that they decided to develop something exactly like it. Well, actually, what they did is they took our source code, and this is this looks different than what I showed you before, but this is what our initial version, our pilot version, looked like. Exactly, and the only thing that they really ended up doing was changing the data within the tool itself. So they customized it, which was great. We were very happy to have the code repurposed. It's available for other communities that are interested in doing that. And they've customized it, so they've already kind of they're following that use case that we talked about as far as using this model and then taking it to the next step with best available data. Here we're looking at, this is Sandy extent, Sandy surge extent. They also have some other, if you're looking across the top ribbon there, you can see that there are more icons. They've included other data sets that they have developed through other projects. They have quite a bit of funding to work with and a lot of initiatives underway. So they've developed some coastal vulnerability indexes, as well as some of the other data sets that we've included. Over on the left-hand side, they have some land use data and some other kind of specialized land cover data sets. In addition to working with, using that tool, they are working with communities through this particular planning assessment or analysis process with a checklist that they call Getting to Resilience. So they are working with the communities to look at the maps and also go through this checklist and essentially find gaps, areas for improvement, and they're linking specifically to incentive-based programs like the FEMA Community Community Rating System. They're working with another program, the Sustainable New Jersey, as well as the Hazard Mitigation Grant Funding, Hazard Mitigation Planning Grant Funding available through FEMA, so that they are linking opportunities to tangible funds. And then ultimately, they're working to implement these recommendations, such as a green infrastructure project we see here as a living shoreline. So that ends up being my segue into this last thing I want to talk about, green infrastructure. It ends up being an opportunity within your kind of holistic approach, one of your opportunities for increasing resilience. This is something that we're working on now. It is going to be an online, self-guided mapping guide for somebody, a spatial analyst, who's relatively new or has not undertaken a green infrastructure mapping project before. When we talk about green infrastructure mapping, we're really talking about conservation mapping, identifying and prioritizing areas for conservation. Traditionally, that's done under the microscope of conservation biology, looking at habitat, looking at species, where we've kind of changed the approach a little bit, and we're actually looking at conservation or prioritization for the purposes of increasing resilience. So we've developed this within what we call a work plan approach. And so it just walks someone through the steps of developing a work plan, essentially laying out everything that they do all the way through all of their analyses, work also within the context of working with a project group and an advisory group. So these are the steps that we work within. For each of the steps, we actually provide deeper guidance, deeper insight into that particular step and the work that's involved. Along the way, we also link to relevant case studies. There are 3 case studies that we highlight within this particular tool. The first one is adapting the sea level rise in Maryland through conservation mapping. So that was done at the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, where they were looking for wetland adaptation areas. The second one is green infrastructure for coastal protection in Jamaica Bay and Staten Island. That was a project that's wrapping up now, Trust for Public Land. Essentially, they were tagging parcels with prioritization on 3 different themes, really. Flood risk exposure, societal exposure, and critical facility exposure, as well as opportunities for, or indicators for green infrastructure. And the third one is the Nature Conservancy Marsh Protection Potential Index. So as you can see, these are all kind of prioritization-based GIS methodologies that have occurred in other mapping projects that focus on building resilience, identifying areas for increasing resilience. And with that, I'll take any questions. I thank you for sticking with me throughout this. Any further questions? Yes?
Why green infrastructure instead of traditional infrastructure?
By, what do you mean traditional infrastructure?
Good riprap and sort of fortifying coastal areas, seawalls.
Yeah, so generally green infrastructure ends up being more resilient. The seawalls kind of bring their own trade-offs. If you put in a seawall, you can be undermined and cause erosion on either side of it. Whereas something that is natural has the ability to migrate, has the ability to adapt.
I like green infrastructure for sure.
Yeah.
I was just curious.
Yeah, and that's, and you remind me of a point I wanted to make. When we talk about green infrastructure, there are different scales from having a green roof or capturing rainwater, small scale, site scale, to landscape scale, where you have a multi-county conservation or green infrastructure network. And so that's largely what I'm talking about here. It's kind of a network-based plan. Any other questions?
The flood exposure to visual house. In North Carolina, they are working on what's called IRIS, which looks very similar to the type of your address, and it shows you what risk is for flooding and other tools, I guess, they're adding to it. Are y'all working together with them?
Yeah, they're definitely separate, and I'm sure that there are lots of instances like that. They're kind of flooded with viewers, if you will, with flooding viewers. But this one is particularly crafted for that community engagement, and it's designed to not be so GIS-y, if you will, so it's more accessible. Oh yes, that's better to hear. So that's another tool that we have out there, the Sea Level Rise and Coastal Flooding Impacts Viewer, as clustered earlier, I just named it. And so we actually developed the DEMs for that from LiDAR data. So it's high resolution. That's actually stuff that you can download via the Digital Coast and our data registry. They're out there. And the processed DEMs are available by request. It varies. It varies. But some of them are moving. I'm sorry, repeat your question.
Soil type is part of any of those models.
It's not. We did at one point poke around with mapping hydric soils, and it just kind of fell out of the shuffle. But it's something that we had kind of mentioned as an indicator or something for consideration. Any other questions? Thank you.